good buddy Jack Patterson, and Jack he's a jack of many trades, no pun intended. Because last week we brought him on because Tennessee and Georgia played the biggest game, but he sits right there on the line. Auburn had a huge matchup, or Georgia had a huge matchup last week. Auburn this week, he's got it all there. You see all the helmets and all the figurines. Number one, I know it's a really busy time of year.
In other words, it's normal for us. You know,
yeah.
we stay busy down here when it's football season, but no, we're doing good. It's a Friday night. We got a great slate of high school football, and of course, a great slate of college football coming up as well.
No question about it. Let's dive into that Auburn matchup with Oklahoma this week. Several storylines. We just teed a couple up. As you take a look at this game from the outset, from a big picture standpoint, as these two teams match up. Auburn making their first ever trip over to the Sooner State. What are your overall thoughts about this one and just the way that Auburn needs to play on Saturday?
I think this is the first big test, okay? Because, yeah, you had the Baylor game. That was a test, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, you know, your first big SEC test on the road, not just for the team, but for Jackson Arnold. And then you add on the fact that you're playing against your former team. There's you know, as you guys have been saying, the storylines write themselves, okay? You know, but, you know, it's a big test, you know. Can Jackson Arnold get the passing game going? We've seen them be able to run the ball with reckless abandon all season long, so I'm not worried about the running attack, but I'm intrigued to see, can they pass the ball, okay? If they can pass the ball, I think it's going to shape up real well for Auburn, and then it'll be a test for the Auburn defense as well. John Mateer's been playing fantastic for the Sooners so far this year, so it's going to be a test for the Auburn defense as well. They've looked really good, okay? They haven't had many slip-ups so far this year, but, you know, when you're going on the road to a SEC school, you know, it just kind of hits different.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what this defense can do against an offense that's really rolling right now.
Absolutely. You mentioned Jackson Arnold, and there's going to be so many storylines. That will be the talking point for Auburn going into this matchup. And if he has any media availability between now and game day or game time, that question will come up a million times. How do you think that he is approaching this week? And from a mindset standpoint and from an execution standpoint, knowing the guys on the other sideline, the coaches on the other sideline, the fans on the other sideline, as he goes back into Norman?
You know, the one thing I've noticed from Jackson Arnold so far this year, that he's kind of been calm and cool, okay?
Yep.
There hasn't been a lot of panic. There hasn't been a lot of, urgent, I guess anxiousness, for a lack of a better term. Okay, he's been, even when he's been under pressure, he hasn't, done a lot of crazy things. Now, he's probably taken more sacks than he should have at the beginning of the season so far, but he's been calm and cool, and especially when things did get pressure, the pressure did build up. I look back to the back end of that Baylor game when the game was still in doubt, but Auburn was able to put things away and come away with a 2-touchdown win. So this is going to be their biggest test since that game. Okay, and like I said, going back to a place where things just didn't work out, but for him and the Sooners. Okay, and I saw an interview from Coach Venables earlier this week where he said, hey, we wish him the best, and and they hope they're glad to see him do well, but they just don't want him to do well this week. That's all.
Yeah, no question. Speaking of quarterbacks on the other side of the field, is probably through a few games this season, maybe you can make an argument, the best quarterback in the SEC right now in John Mateer. How do you think that he will attack this DJ Durkin defense and what Auburn has been able to do so far this year? There was a lot of hype about Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer and what they were bringing from Washington State. Could it work in the SEC? It looks like they've passed every test so far. What do you expect to see on Saturday as they attack the Auburn defense?
Yeah, so far so good for the Oklahoma offense, all right? John Mateer has been fantastic, and you're even starting to hear whispers about Heisman candidacy for him.
Yep.
So he's been fantastic for the Sooners so far this year. But one thing I will say about DJ Durkin's defense for Auburn is they have been able to adapt. Okay, and they're gonna make Mateer have to play. Okay, he's gonna have to bring his A game. He's gonna have to be on point. Okay, there's not gonna be many opportunities where they're going to make mistakes, okay? Auburn's been very good, especially at shutting down the run, so I don't think that Oklahoma is going to be able to use the run. They're going to have to use the pass in order to beat Auburn. And if Auburn has a weakness on the defense, I would say it's the pass game, but it's not a tremendous weakness.
Right.
Okay? So it's one of those things where I have confidence in DJ Durkin to come up with a scheme that's going to be able to, slow that Oklahoma offense down. It's going to, just like how we've said, it's going to be a big challenge for Jackson Arnold. It's probably going to be the biggest challenge the Auburn offense has seen all year. Likewise, this is probably going to be the biggest challenge that the Oklahoma offense has seen all year as well.
No question. We got a chance to hear from Auburn head coach Hugh Freeze. He's been asked a lot about these quarterbacks, about both of them, about John Mateer and Jackson Arnold. Here's what he had to say about Arnold's return to Oklahoma.
Well, the good thing is I've had personal experience with that. I've had to go back in a place where that I enjoyed coaching and won some games, and had to go back in there and take another team in and play. And that whole week, it was a challenge for me not to think about some of that. I know the same will be true for Jackson, but he's very mature, and he does not. He doesn't give any credit to any noise or talk. I mean, he's a pro. We all understand that, people might cheer for him, boo him, whatever it is, but I think he's mentally strong and is more about preparing. And my advice to him is, man, just keep the focus on our team. And that was my advice to myself. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about our team preparing to go in to play. I don't know what they're ranked now, but I think they're a top 10 team. So that's where the focus needs to be, and all the rest will subside at some point, and it will be about what we did on the field.
I think Coach putting a solid perspective on that, going back to his time when he was a coach, going back into his old territory when he was the coach at Liberty, going back to Ole Miss, and just how you're balancing the emotions. And I think he's kind of a good guru, so to speak, in Jackson Arnold's ear. For Auburn going on the road, I'm really interested in this from your perspective, Jack, because last year we saw Auburn start the season with 5 straight home games, and they didn't play very well, and Oklahoma's one of those losses. This year, they start with 2 big road games, Baylor being one of them, this one being the next one. How do you think that they'll handle Norman and going on the road at night, knowing we just saw them in prime time a couple of weeks ago against Michigan?
The way I see it is last year and this year are kind of 2 different teams, okay? Mm-hmm. Like, this year's squad, you got a lot of new pieces. Obviously, the most obvious one is Jackson Arnold at quarterback, but you also got new guys starting as well. You got Damari Alston and Jeremiah Cobb in the backfield. You got, you got Cam Coleman still there and off for the wide receiver room, but you also got Eric Singleton and Horatio Fields right there with them as well. And, like I said, there's a lot of talent on this squad, and it's a different squad. You can say the same thing on the defense as well. You have different guys right there as well, and I think just the confidence is different. You can see the confidence. Okay, they've been able to handle their business, and now it's definitely a business trip going to Norman, trying to get this win for the Tigers. And the way I look at it is, if they can get this win, it is a springboard for what they can do the rest of the season.
100%. I agree with you fully. The point spread right now, Auburn is a small underdog in this one. So giving some love to Auburn, and I think that the odds makers are basically saying that on a neutral site field, these are basically 2 even teams. So we'll see what happens on Saturday there in Norman. But before we let you go, you got to talk about those Georgia Bulldogs as well. A big one last week against Tennessee, an off week this week, just like Alabama, just ahead of that matchup between those 2 squads. What did you make of last week's win over Tennessee and Kirby Smart's message here in the bye week?
Talking about confidence, I mean, that is a major shot in the arm for a very young Georgia Bulldogs team, okay? That's Gunnar Stockton's biggest win to date, okay? And he played every bit of it, okay? All those touchdown passes. I think, he had 304 yards passing, 3 total touchdowns in that game, and, leading the team back, being down so many times at various points in that game. But like I said, for a team that's so young, I mean, yeah, you got some vets on that team, but for a team that's so young to be able to go to Rocky Top, a notoriously tough place to play, okay, to be able to go there and come back, okay? Come back and get the win. You know, that is a major feather in the cap. And I think it's probably the best thing that they have a bye week right now because, you know, it could be real easy to come off this bye week. I mean, coming off of that game and go into a game like the game they're getting ready to go into against Alabama and, you know, come out flat. Okay.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, it's a good thing for Georgia to be able to cut, you know, get out of it, you know, you celebrate those games, but you also got to put it in the past. You got another major showdown coming up against Alabama, and Alabama, you know, we covered them too. And, you know, Kalen DeBoer's bunch looking for a major win. They need one as well, especially after that loss to Florida State. They don't have as much room for error that Georgia does. So it's going to be a massive, massive game next Saturday between the hedges. And, you know, this is going to be one that's going to honestly shape up how the SEC is won.
Absolutely. Excellent breakdown of both the Auburn-Oklahoma game and what's in store for Georgia and Alabama next week. Jack, we thank you so much. We'll let you get to high school football and enjoy the weekend.
Appreciate it, fellas.
Absolutely.